In part, we are here to celebrate all of you, those who are here in person, those who are watching now on live stream, those who will watch later on YouTube or Facebook. You have played a role in affirming the right of Pennsylvania voters to choose their politicians. So thank you. Applause, yes. Together, we have informed tens of thousands of voters about the need for better maps. Together, we wrote hundreds of letters to the editor. We collected hundreds of resolutions from counties and municipalities. Together, we gathered more than 100,000 petition signatures and contacted PA legislators in every single legislative district. Thank you for that work. We did not get the reforms we worked for, but we did get much better maps. We asked for a legislative reapportionment commission chair who would act on behalf of voters, and we were given the most impartial chair the commission has had since it was put in law in 1968. We asked for a more transparent process with greater public input, and the commission held far more hearings than we asked for and put everything on a commission website. Thousands of you showed up to give testimony, and many of you encouraged and trained others to do the same, and many of you gave testimony online as well. Thank you for doing that. We asked for maps that were compliant with constitutional criteria and that were less biased by a mix of measurable criteria, and we worked together to create our own examples. Thank you to all who helped review maps or who drew maps yourselves. The maps we submitted were far better than the previous maps and set a high standard for the commission. The final House map drawn by the commission met and surpassed those standards. The Senate map, not quite what we wanted, still is far, far better than those of the last 3 decades. So thank you, all of you. We have demonstrated that PA voters will pay attention, even to a complicated issue, and do want better than what we've been given in the past. And we have demonstrated without a doubt that maps matter. The maps matter a lot. We now have maps that will give voters a greater voice for the next decade. But we all know the work is not done. We know that until we remove legislators from the process completely, we will still run the risk of recurrent buddymanders and of districts drawn to benefit candidates ready to fall in step with the power brokers rather than the people of Pennsylvania. So we will keep working for redistricting reform. Today is a next step in that, but we also expect to take time in the new year to gather more feedback on lessons learned and to build consensus with legislators, redistricting experts, mappers, and leaders of partner organizations to draft the best possible redistricting legislation for the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. We have learned, though, that even with well-crafted legislation and strong support from legislators on both sides of the aisle, without better legislative rules, reform bills like ours will not get a vote in Harrisburg. So we are continuing the work on legislative rules. The rules research team continues to grow, and their work continues to shine a light on one of the most dysfunctional legislatures in the country. This legislative session ended with a record low in passage of bills introduced by the minority party. Just one bill introduced by a House Democrat and 2 introduced by Senate Democrats made it to the governor's desk. That is an all-time low. But the dysfunction goes far beyond shutting out one party completely. Half the bills that passed in the Senate, sometimes unanimously, were ignored or blocked in the House. Half the bills passed in the House were ignored or blocked in the Senate, even though both chambers were controlled by the same party. Legislation recommended by bipartisan commissions after extensive study and stakeholder input went nowhere. Committee chairs routinely ignored legislation requested by the Farm Bureau, by county commissioners, by a large majority of PA school boards, and by other associations of elected officials. We are at a really interesting moment in PA history. 30 years of gerrymandered legislative districts empowered an unaccountable legislature. The new maps in place for this year's election shook that dynamic. So what happens next? No one really knows. Will our legislators notice that voters are watching? Will they rethink legislative rules so bills with strong bipartisan support can finally get a vote? Will they decide to collaborate, negotiate, look for best practices, and work on our behalf? Believe it or not, we have a say in how this turns out. There is no easy path to representation. There is no silver bullet to vanquish the dragon of partisan manipulation. But we saw something amazing in this past election. We saw citizens talking to each other about why our state legislature matters. We saw candidates talking about legislative rules. We saw a re-energized, publicly funded press digging deep into stories about how bills pass or don't pass, and how special interests undermine the public good. Our focus today is on redistricting and legislative rules, but also the possibility of joining voices with others to inform and engage parts of the Commonwealth that have lost hope in the promise of democracy. We have seen how empowering it can be when voters learn how to read and track bills, or to take the first step in meeting with legislators and their staff, or to give testimony to a group like the Legislative Reapportionment Commission. And we have seen legislators pay attention when they know that their constituents are watching. We have learned a lot in the years since Fair Districts PA started. We've learned from each other, we've learned from other organizations, but we still have a lot more to learn about how to talk across deepening divisions, about how to encourage and energize new leaders, about how to share what we've learned in ways that others want to hear, about how to organize and share the load so we don't burn out, about how to partner with people unlike ourselves to build support for solutions that allow all of our communities to thrive. You'll hear from a mix of voices today, some with deep roots in the work of justice here in Pennsylvania, some drawn by a new interest in maps or PA politics, some who stumbled into one area of confusion led on by a simple question about outdated laws, illogical policies, or unkept promises. Some you'll hear from today are Fair Districts PA volunteers, some work with partner organizations, some are new to us, bringing insights and lessons we need. In preparation for today, I've been thinking about 3 words, and I invite you to carry these words with you through the day. Invitation is the first. I'm here today because someone invited me to a League of Women Voters meeting back in 2012. And then someone invited me to write a paragraph about something I mentioned in that meeting, and then invited me to lead a small working group, and then invited me to attend a conference in DC. The invitations went on, and I kept saying yes and learning more with every yes. Who can you invite to be part of our work? And who invited you? The second word is appreciation. I appreciate the people who invited me. Susan Cardy is one of those, and she is here today. Susan, where are you? Wave your hand. There she is. Susan Cardy. She was the, hurrah for Susan. Susan was the president of the local Chester County League as I was becoming involved, and then she became president of the State League, and I became a member of the State League board. She invited me to join her many times along the way, and she was the one who invited me to the first meeting with legislators to discuss drafting a constitutional amendment to create an independent redistricting commission. That invitation changed my life, as you can see. So thank you so much, Susan, for that invitation and all the other invitations along the way. I also appreciate the people who have graciously accepted many of my own invitations over the past 7 years since we started Fair Districts PA. Those who said yes to roles that made them stretch, who took on tasks beyond what they expected, who listened to a simple request and turned it into something far larger than any of us imagined. There are many of those examples. If I started naming you all here, it would take several hours. I don't have time to do that. But I appreciate every contribution, and I am myself stretched and changed and challenged and enriched by all that you contribute. And that leads me to my third word, collaboration. The vision of democracy never fully realized is that together we can create a world where our children thrive, where all our work is well rewarded, where together we share ideas, evaluate risks, and build systems and structures that function well for all of us. I see that in the functioning of some of our local groups as you think and plan and accomplish amazing things. I see that in our statewide working groups, building new ways to manage information or pulling major projects or events together quickly, handing off tasks and building on each other's strengths and challenging each other's assumptions. I've also sometimes seen it in our work with other organizations. Our People's Maps were an example of that for me, taking the Unity Maps Pennsylvania Voice Partners created and embedding that work in the work of our own mapping team to submit the People's Maps. The Prison Gerrymandering Project was another example. organizations with very different backgrounds and strengths, creating a series of events to share information, strategy, and stories from people most impacted by unjust policies. Those efforts were in large part successful because of the breadth of organizations that worked together. I hope you'll be listening today for invitations, for appreciation, for opportunities to collaborate in new ways. I hope you'll talk to new people you meet, learn from the sessions you attend, and take home new ideas about how to make invitation, appreciation, and collaboration part of your work and part of your own daily engagement. Just a word about what comes next. I hope you all have a program. I've asked some of our volunteers to introduce speakers. In some places in your programs, you'll see two names. The first name will be the speaker, the second, a volunteer from Fair Districts PA, who will do a short introduction. I apologize if there's any confusion there. I am really, really glad that you're here. I am really thankful you care enough to be part of this work, and I look forward to what we can do together in the year ahead. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I've had the pleasure of working with our first speaker this morning over the past year or so in drawing maps and educating Pennsylvanians across the state about the redistricting process. Our first speaker is Justin Villere. Justin led the Draw the Lines initiative of the Committee of 70. Most of you have probably heard his name, but Justin and his team drew thousands of maps with thousands of Pennsylvanians and brought thousands of people across the state into the redistricting process. Thanks to outreach and education by teams like Justin's and Fair Districts, we now have better maps than we had before, and Justin is going to reflect on those successes as well as talk about next steps to ensure success in the future. Justin?
Thank you. Excuse me. Thank you very much, Michael. Michael was one of our most prolific mappers, actually, so my team included him. How many competitions did you win? 2, 3, 2? Yeah, so there are a number of our mappers in the audience today, so it's very exciting to see friendly faces out here, and excited to be here this morning. Again, my name is Justin Villere. I work with the Committee of 70. We are a civic engagement, good government, nonpartisan, nonprofit organization in Philadelphia. We do statewide work as well, and one of our primary efforts over the last 4, 5, 6 years was Draw the Lines. And Draw the Lines was an education program in which we kind of built on the work that Fair Districts did, and we wanted to take the same type of data and mapping tools, very powerful tools that the political professionals used to create these gerrymanders that we were all fighting against. We wanted to take that same info and data and give that back to Pennsylvanians so that they could work on their own maps and learn about the process and understand how to create better maps. Our working theory was that Pennsylvanians who didn't have a political self-interest in this could create much better maps than the partisan politicians and operatives that were creating these maps. So what we did was we created a competition model, as I alluded to with Michael, where we ended up having over 7,000 people participate in drawing their own maps with the goal of having them identify what values and criteria mattered most to them. And they submitted those maps to our competitions, and then we had independent, nonpartisan judges, civic leaders from across the state, who would judge those maps not on criteria that they brought, but on the criteria that the mappers themselves identified as values that were important to them. And what was really neat about this is we were able to create essentially a crowdsourced repository of data and information on the values and criteria that mattered most to Pennsylvanians. And then we were able to create a series of maps around those data and the actual lines that they drew on our publicly available mapping platform. So I will put a plug in. We have 2 of our mappers and myself are going to be doing a session this afternoon on those redistricting criteria, and we'll really be getting into the weeds on both the congressional map and then the state legislative maps and what those criteria were. So I think it's at 2:10, so look out for us for that. But essentially, and Carol alluded to this too, our goal was to, if we couldn't pass any sort of legislation, ultimately we wanted to create a better process and better maps. And I'm really excited to say that, and to build on what Carol said, think it's very clear we did that. And that's thanks to the work of our mappers, but then all the work of all of you. So congratulations to you all for your work this year. Like I said, we had 7,200 people across Pennsylvania from a range of different geographies, backgrounds, political ideologies who participated in this. They drew 1,500 maps. We've focused a lot of our efforts on school outreach, so high schools and colleges, with the goal of engaging the next generation in this work. And so we had over 150 schools who participated in this in some form, which we're really excited about. And we're excited to bring them forward on this in the future. I'm going to speak to the congressional map. We'll talk about the state legislative maps this afternoon. But on the congressional map, what I said earlier, we took all that information from those 1,500 maps that people drew. We put that into one thing called the Pennsylvania Citizens Map. And the process by which we did that was we invited about 30 of our most prolific mappers. Michael Skros is one of them, Michael Waxenberg back there, Ann Hanna, I don't know if she's in here yet. There she is. She was on the team as well, and if I'm forgetting anybody else in our group, please forgive me. But we created the Citizen Map Corps. These are our best mappers, the best of the best. These are all citizen experts on mapping. All of them are self-taught. And what they did is they helped us distill all that data and all the different lines that we saw from those maps into this citizens map. And then we produced that map for first the House and Senate state government committees for their consideration, and then eventually when the process made its way to the courts, we produced the citizens map to the Pennsylvania State Supreme Court. And so there were 13 maps, and I think it's important to note that the 13 maps, some were submitted by nonprofit groups, some were submitted by partisan influences. Every single one of them was better than the map that was produced in 2011. And again, it's important to step back and say, that's because of the work that you all did. So again, great work on that. The map that we had, we were pretty proud of. I think our map was not chosen by the court. It was the so-called Carter map, which I think, as we'll talk about this afternoon, was a very strong map in the criteria and the metrics. Our map was really good too, and we were close. I'm pretty sure we were close to being selected. One lesson we learned: do not split Pittsburgh. There is a long-standing tradition. You don't split Pittsburgh. Even though a lot of our mappers split it on that point, I think we were dismissed because 4 of the 7 justices had strong ties to Allegheny County. So next time, we'll go against our mappers' wishes. But during the hearing, late Chief Justice Max Baer pointed out, and I'm going to read a direct quote. He said, "I thought the committee of 70 and draw the lines, and the methodology used here was really commendable. Congratulations to all those involved in a really transparent process." And that last word is the most important thing, I think, of all this, a really transparent process. And so, again, because of the work that all of you did, all the people watching at home and throughout the Fair Districts Network and the Draw the Lines team, this is why we had better maps this time around. And so, again, it's important to sit back and appreciate that. Some of the other, Carol talked about this, we helped lead a coalition to try to select an independent member of the Legislative Reapportionment Commission. The chair ultimately, in our mind, was going to be the deciding vote, and so we thought that that person needed to be someone who was independent, would be separate of partisan influences, and could stand up to those partisan influences from both parties trying to push their way forward. And so we thought Chairman Mark Nordenberg was a great selection. We had pushed for a public application process for chairs. I don't know if I imagine some of you in here did apply to that, which is fantastic. Yes, exactly, Michael did. And so there were 5 times the number of applications from the public in 2021 than there were in 2011. So that's, again, something that's really exciting. Moving forward, some important lessons that we took away from our work. I think we all proved wrong the notion that redistricting is too complicated, too wonky. I'm sure every one of you heard this. Like, nobody's going to pay attention to this. This is too complicated for people to hear. Carol, your email list is tens and tens of thousands of people, which started from 0, right? And so you all, the work that you did, proved that notion wrong. And I don't think that is ever going to change moving forward. This group of people and then the next wave of volunteers is going to keep this issue alive moving forward. So that's fantastic. We learned a deep value in partnerships. We don't always have to agree on specific tactics or strategy, but do the work that Draw the Lines and the Committee of 70 did, and then working with Fair Districts, working with PA Voice, Common Cause, and our other partners, we had a common notion or common goal and better process and better maps, and we were all able to work with our different constituencies, different tactics to get to that point. And so thinking forward, like we don't always have to agree on everything, but we all have this same notion of where we want to go, and so we'll keep that in mind as we continue to work together. I think flexibility is also very important. So, we all started with the idea that an independent citizens commission was the gold standard. We were going to pursue that. That obviously didn't work, and so then the legislative goal moved towards LACRA, right? And then that didn't pass. But this push continued, even though it's like we were the phrase in tech parlance is failing fast, failing forward. We continued to fail, but we failed forward, and so that we continued to open the window for better reforms, even though we didn't get those things actually passed. But ultimately, that flexibility towards what we were defining as success allowed us to have a much better process at the end. Also, patience is another important virtue. So even though full reform didn't happen in 2021, doesn't mean it can't happen in 2031. If it doesn't happen in 2031, doesn't mean it can't happen in 2041. Our democracy was built over hundreds of years now, right? And so we have to continue to keep that in mind, that patience is the most important virtue for us, and we'll continue to move forward. I think the toothpaste is out of the tube on this one. We're not going back to the previous days, so we can only continue to improve. So, and again, last lesson, don't split Pittsburgh. All right. So what's next for Draw the Lines and our work in this initiative? The Committee of 70 is very invested in this. We don't have active competitions going right now, but we've kept our resources online. drawthelinespa.org. Schools and teachers are still welcome to use those resources. They're free to use. The mapping platform, a quick plug for Dave's Redistricting app, is fantastic if you all want to jump in and draw your own maps. Don't have active competitions, but there's nothing wrong with getting in there and seeing how the data and the mapping platform works. So that's great. We're also advancing a program called Ballot PA, which is our open primaries initiative. It's the goal right now. Pennsylvania is one of 9 states that has closed primaries, and so our working theory is that when you have closed primaries, you're cutting important voices out of one of the most important parts of our election process, and that's the nominating procedure for how both major parties are nominating their candidates. And so we want to open that up to independents who can vote, so that they can vote not just in the general, but in oftentimes, as you all have learned, the most important elections, the primaries, where people don't have contests from the other side of the aisle. So that's one of our programs that we're looking at. We're keeping track of the constitutional amendment efforts that are going on as people try to make end runs around the normal legislative process. So we're working with coalition partners on that. And then I'm going to give a quick shout out to our president and CEO, Al Schmidt. He is a former Philadelphia City Commissioner, and as the lone Republican on the City Commissioner's office in 2020, he stood up to the former president, who called him out by name multiple times and led to, yes, Al deserves a, yes. Mm-hmm. So I'm very fortunate to get to work with Al now, and he's doing his focus, and he's put a lot of 70 resources into this, is to try to continue to make sure that Pennsylvania's election infrastructure can withstand the attacks and misinformation and disinformation that are coming, and make sure that poll workers and election administrators have the resources they need, but also can carry out the duties that our elections need to function. So, one final note, amidst all the other work that we're doing to make elections fair and accountable in Pennsylvania, redistricting is absolutely a paramount priority for us, for C70 and for Draw the Lines moving forward. And we're really excited to keep working with the Fair Districts team and the other partners that will be presenting today as we continue to push towards an even better process and even better maps in 2030 and 31. So thank you all. Appreciate it.
Good morning, everyone. I'm introducing Anthony Eade this morning. So Anthony had only been eligible to vote for about 10 years when he applied to be part of the random drawing for the brand new Independent Citizens Redistricting Commission in Michigan. At 28, he would become the youngest member on that commission. His work as a commissioner has temporarily interrupted his medical school education, and when he returns to medical school, he will continue his path toward becoming an orthopedic surgeon. Besides his youth, Anthony brought diversity of culture to the commission through his Middle Eastern background, and he brought diversity of thought through his background in science. Through his work in the medical school, in the medical field, Anthony has been very aware of how governmental policy impacts patient care, and he is a strong believer in the power of advocacy. He was a strong supporter of the Citizens Initiative that brought the constitutional amendment for the Independent Citizens Redistricting Commission to the ballot box in Michigan. He's not affiliated with either major party, and he was thrilled to have been selected to serve on the commission. On the commission, I imagine that he took on the mapping challenges, much like our own Fair Districts PA mapping team. After gathering much testimony from the citizens of Michigan, Anthony drew the chestnut map, which would eventually be adopted as Michigan's congressional map. He also drew many of the state Senate and state House districts. Since the maps were selected, Anthony has been amplifying the lessons learned from the experience of the Michigan Independent Citizens Redistricting Commission. And as we continue our quest for an Independent Citizens Redistricting Commission here in Pennsylvania for 2031, there is a lot that can be learned from the Michigan experience. Anthony?
Well, thank you, Ruth, for that beautiful introduction. Hello, everybody. It's a wonderful morning here. Great to be in the great Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Let me say, last time I was here, it was at an interview with UPMC, and just beautiful institution. You guys have wonderful facilities here. But, you know, there is a thing or two that y'all could take from the Midland state of Michigan. Right, that's why we're here today, to talk about reforms, talk about redistricting, and figure out ways to create fair maps. Now, just a few years ago, I was a regular, everyday citizen. I mean, I still am. You know, I don't have a degree in political science. Before I was a commissioner, I had never drawn a congressional map before. I had never tried to put districts into Districtor or Dave's redistricting. I didn't even know what those were. And that is the beauty of our new process in Michigan. Back in 2018, a grassroots organization called Voters Not Politicians, which I gotta say is just the best name for any grassroots group. I mean, who couldn't get behind that? Voters Not Politicians. What a great name. They started with one Facebook post and were able to put together a ballot initiative that was voted on in the 2018 midterm election. That ballot initiative passed by about a 61% margin. Now, I don't know how things work here, but Michigan's a battleground state. We have a ton of independents, a ton of people on both sides of the aisle. It's hard to get 61% of people to agree with just about anything. But Voters Not Politicians was able to show just how terrible our previous legislative drawn maps were. And you know, I think this idea of fairness strikes people on both sides of the aisle, even people in power, because they realize that while they might be benefiting from it now, they might be on the short end of the stick in the future. So that initiative passed. You know, luckily, Michigan's a state that has ballot initiatives. I know not every state has them, so other states may need to look at, you know, the regular legislative process in order to get an independent redistricting commission going. But you know, luckily in Michigan we do. So we wanted to create a model that could last not only for our state in the future, but could also be learned from by other states. So what does our commission look like? It's 13 randomly selected citizens, 4 of which self-identify as Democrats, 4 as Republicans, and 5 as independents. We have open primaries in Michigan, luckily, so you don't have to register for either political party to vote. You could vote Democrat one year, Republican in another year, depending on who's on the ballot, depending on what races, especially local races, you think are most important. And it really gives you, you know, the best voice to be an informed citizen and make the best decisions for you and your family. There are 13 of us on this commission, who come from all walks of life. We have folks of all ages, all races, and yeah, all walks of life. We have a few retired veterans. We have a caregiver. We have a train operator. We have a few handymen and women. And you have me who was in the sciences before this. And I gotta say, it's been a long 2 years where we took over 30,000 public comments from the public visiting over 15 different cities around our state. But at the end of the day, we were able to come up with some bipartisanship, come up with some compromises, and get maps adopted. We got rid of gerrymandering in Michigan. Yeah, let's give a round of applause. We're going to talk more about this later, but I really think one of the most important aspects of our commission is our structure. Being a bipartisan commission that's comprised of 4 Democrats, 4 Republicans, and 5 independents has some real pros. We also have a measure in our state constitution that said in order to adopt any maps, we had to have bipartisan support. That meant we had to have 2 votes from the Democratic pool, 2 votes from the Republican pool, and 2 votes from the independent pool, as well as 1 more to get majority in order to adopt any maps into law. That made it so that there wasn't a situation where the Democrats and Republicans could come together and outvote the independents, or the Democrats and independents could come together and outvote the Republicans. We couldn't have that. We had to get bipartisan support. We had to get input from both sides, and I think the maps truly reflect that. Another big benefit of our commission, and this was due to the constitutional amendment, was while we had some pretty large discretion on what we were to do, that discretion wasn't absolute. We had 7 specific redistricting criteria that we had to follow. And these criteria were ranked in order from most important to least important. These included, going from the top down, things like equal population and following the Voting Rights Act, having geographically contiguous districts. Those are kind of the 2 federal aspects. Most of you know those are things you have to follow under federal law. The next 2 are interesting. It's where Michigan's a little unique in how we do redistricting. And that's because these aspects are quite a bit higher than what you see in other states. Our 3rd criteria is taking into account communities of interest. Communities that might share common cultural, historic, whether that be socioeconomical factors, different geographic factors, different heritage perhaps, or perhaps what we found in Michigan in our lakeshore communities, communities that rely on specific agriculture or just state functions in order to have their way of life. And these community of interest played a huge part in our process. We'll go over this later, but there are community of interest districts that were submitted by the public that almost 1 for 1 made it into our maps. The next criteria is no party could have a disproportionate advantage over any other party. That criteria made it required for us to pass a fair map. Then after that, you get into the more usual things. Aspects like not having incumbency take an effect on the districts, respecting city, county, and township lines, and finally having reasonable compactness. So what did we do? We visited 15 different cities in our state before drawing any maps. We then went through an initial map drawing process that was collaborative and all transparent. The last speaker had spoken on transparency, and that really was one of our core values. From the initial random drawing, where I was selected to be a commissioner, throughout our hiring processes, throughout all of the drawing, throughout the final voting on our maps, to even talking about our lawsuits, all of our work has been in public. All of our data has been available. If any of y'all are interested, you could go on YouTube right now and look up some of our meetings in the past 2 years and see us drawing maps. So we did that, and at the end of the day, we were able to pass the maps in about, it was the end of December of 2021. Currently, there are a couple lawsuits to get sorted out, as I think is expected anytime you have, especially an inaugural redistricting commission. But I'd like to really quick talk about the results. We just had the first election under these new maps. And it was a pretty historic election in Michigan. It was historic for the fact that for the first time in a very long time, the seat share at the end of the election matched up with the proportion of votes. And I think that really is the goal that voters, not politicians, had, and the people of Michigan had when they voted for Proposal 2 in 2018. We were in a situation where even though one party didn't always get the greatest number of votes, they no matter what had the most seats. And that's not fair. It's not fair no matter who you are, and I think most people can understand that's not, a fair representative government to be a part of. So for the first time in Michigan, in 40 years, the state Senate flipped, and for the first time in over 10 years, since before the last legislative approved maps had taken place, the House also flipped. And these flips were matched up with our data. The whole reason I wanted to be a commissioner in the first place was to take a data-based, evidence-driven process to redistricting, and I think we were able to do that. We're going to talk more about this later in my breakout session, but what I really want to bring through today is you don't need to be some super expert to do this. It's nice to have experts in the field, of course, and we hired out a lot of experts, but it's not required. This was a citizens initiative, and these maps, while we may have been the ones putting pen to paper and going through the GIS software to actually draw the maps, we weren't the real people that drew the maps. The real people that drew the maps were the citizens of Michigan, and they drew them not only through voting for Proposal 2, but through submitting those public comments we talked about. And yeah, I can't wait to show y'all some of our work, and I hope there are some lessons that y'all can take from us in the future. Thank you.
I'm Rachel Stroke and Goff, and I'm here to introduce John Kromer. So conventional wisdom that we just discussed this morning has decreed that gerrymandering was too complicated for citizens to care about or to understand. They clearly proved them wrong in Michigan, and fair districts, the county of 70 and others, proved them wrong here in Pennsylvania. Still, it's not easy to communicate the problems we uncovered as we began to understand how poorly our Pennsylvania legislature served us, the citizens of Pennsylvania. The research team, the rules research team, has struggled for the past 3 years to transform our findings into messages. I want to thank the communication team for their superb work creating the web pages, social media posts, and documents. And thank you all who wrote letters to the editor, op-eds, Twitter posts, and mined data for points to help educate and persuade. And then along came John Kromer. John is a lecturer in urban studies at the University of Pennsylvania. He was a director of housing for the city of Philadelphia for 9 years, and he's the author of Fixing Broken Cities. He's done a lot of thinking about how to educate Philadelphians about housing, another kind of wonky topic. He joined Fair Districts a few months ago with that experience and an idea, a way to present our research in a far more compelling and understandable way. He turned his insight about communication on housing policy into how we could communicate data on redistricting and rules reform. So here's John to talk about Dysfunction by Design, a report he imagined, spearheaded, and with some help from his friends, created so that it is now ready for all of us to peruse and share. John.
Thank you. Good to be here. I organized most of the narrative in this report, which you can get on your iPhone through this fabulous device here. But most of the words really were drawn from online and published narrative by you, Fair Districts PA, and by others whom you cited. So I really had to do the easy part, which was getting that organized and finding a way to present it as kind of a briefing paper that hopefully would be very accessible to people that hadn't been familiar with these issues and needed to get acquainted with them. I'm very well qualified for that because until fairly recently, I didn't have much of a clue either. Every fall semester, I teach a class called the Politics of Housing and Urban Development at Penn, and almost every week I have a practitioner come in and have a conversation with the students. The class falls on a Wednesday, and so the day after Election Day in November, I usually have an elected official or somebody who's very knowledgeable about the nuts and bolts of the political system. And a couple of years ago, Rick Krajewski came to the class. Despite his name, he is a black man, young man, and was elected state representative for a portion of West Philadelphia a couple of years ago. And he said an interesting thing. He said, if you're concerned about schools, about healthcare, about public safety, about voting rights, you've got to know what's going on in the Pennsylvania legislature. And that sort of understanding led him to run for office, and now he's a state representative. That got me thinking about what I should learn and know about what's happening here as well. I had been director of housing for the city of Philadelphia. I administered a $100 million budget annually. But it was possible for me to do that successfully, I think, without knowing very much about how the state legislature works. The state provided about $4 million a year as a contribution to the city's housing budget. So concerns about the state occupied about 4% of my time. So I didn't learn a great deal. But after that, I did some consulting work, including projects for a statewide organization, not unlike Fair Districts in some ways, called the Housing Alliance of Pennsylvania. And the Housing Alliance produced a publication which really influenced this one that you see here today. It was called From Blight to Bright. It was all about blighted properties, vacant and deteriorated properties, and contained suggestions about legislative solutions at the local and state and county and state level that might be mobilized to deal with this problem. Solutions like receivership, which we call conservatorship in Pennsylvania for some reason, in which a court can be petitioned to take control of a neglected property and put it under the control of a responsible developer who will fix it up. Other measures like ticketing property owners for minor code violations, like a junk car in the backyard. Just stuff that can be done easily that can make a difference. And you'll see in the publication there are several case studies that describe an issue, quotes the legislative summary, describes what it does, and provides some history. That was really taken from a series of case studies that appear in From Blight to Bright. And it really impressed me as something that, again, was very accessible, that was easy to understand, that made it possible for you to decide what you could do locally and beyond locally to address an issue that you were concerned about. So that made a big difference in my thinking. I'm a judge of elections in my Northwest Philadelphia neighborhood. I've been a Democratic committee person. I've supported political candidates. And so the redistricting process really was very important to me because there were several questions about how the districts would be reshaped for state representatives in Philadelphia. So I learned about Fair Districts. I followed the Zoom sessions and got a lot of information about what might happen as a result. So in getting acquainted with Fair Districts PA, it really amazed me how much information the organization has acquired and how capable the individuals who volunteer for the committees are in understanding and tracking and evaluating legislation. And so it just occurred to me that it would be great if you could just consolidate a lot of this information and present it, particularly because a legislative session was ending and a new one would begin very shortly. So just to provide a guide about what happened and most important didn't happen, and about what the challenges are in addressing this issue have been, and putting it between a couple of covers was what impressed me as a good opportunity. Fortunately, Carol and Rachel and others agreed, and it was possible to crank this out in really record time. So I really appreciate having the help of all of you in getting this right and making this available. As Carol indicated, this is a really interesting time. No one really knows what's going to happen going forward with respect to a number of absolutely critical issues. So in some sense, we're in the same boat as other people who will be sitting around here shortly making policy decisions for the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And so there's a real opportunity to do a couple of things. One is to get acquainted with the newcomers. You know, I'd like to think that some of them didn't want to get elected just to hang out in Harrisburg, but who actually have ambitions to do something worthwhile. I expect that is the case with some number of the newcomers. Maybe it's a small number, it might be a large number. But either way, getting acquainted with those people who are new to Harrisburg, making ourselves known as a reliable, nonpartisan source of information, and brainstorming with them about opportunities to work together, I think could be beneficial all around. So I look forward to being part of that process, and thank you all for helping me get there from here.
I want to say a few words about kind of where we are, and then we're going to take a break, and we'll come back and talk a bit more about collaboration. Where we are in terms of redistricting, we are actively starting a new statewide redistricting table with organizations that care about this, and you'll hear a lot more about that in the new year. So we're kind of rethinking how we collaborate, who we collaborate with. We'll be starting working groups on things like legislation, legislative outreach, outreach to communities, mapping for racial equity, prison gerrymandering. All of those will have working groups with organizations that are most interested and involved, and certainly Draw the Lines is going to be part of that. League of Women Voters is actively involved in thinking that through as well. So, so that's coming up. Where we are in terms of talking about the rules, as John just said, we are in a fascinating time, and we really wanted to get information to legislators in a format that made sense. So could we have everybody who worked on this, it's a lot of people, everybody who worked on this, could you just stand up for a second so we can just say we're amazed at your amazing work? So some of you don't really know how we're organized. We have local groups, and I hope you're all part of a local group, because that's where the local grassroots advocacy happens, and that's where the outreach to the public happens. We also have statewide working groups, including a communications team, a rules research team, an advocacy advisor team, people who do data work, people who think through new outreach strategies. We've got some web people in the background doing weird things in the middle of the night. I don't even know what they do and how they do it, but they do it. You put a little comment in. We use Slack a lot to communicate, and we put a comment in Slack saying this thing needs to happen, and amazing people do amazing stuff. So it's a really wonderful team working together. But on this issue, we've been a little stumped because what's happened in our state capital is so muddy. And even the legislators themselves, you know, we talk to our longtime supporters and advisors in the legislature, and they say, we have no clue. Who will be the speaker? We don't know. When will that be decided? We're not sure. Normally, January 3rd is the day they vote on the rules. And we were working on kind of a message of, you know, vote no on January 3rd, for rules that take away your right to represent us. But what if they're having conversation before that? And what if they don't vote on the rules on January 3rd? So we've been a little stumped. So we're really excited to have this, because what we're asking to have happen is for people to deliver. We had enough hard copies of this printed to deliver a hard copy to every legislator and have some extra to give to organizational leaders. We did not make enough for you all to take one home as a souvenir. I'm sorry, that's just the case. They're kind of expensive to print, but you all have a QR code right here, this little QR code. So if your phone does QR codes, use that QR code. If you don't like doing QR codes or your phone doesn't comply, we're also going to be sending a follow-up email with links to that document online. The follow-up email will also have links to all of our breakout sessions on YouTube and to the recording of this on YouTube, plus probably a few other little things like a survey, like what do you want to do next? That will probably also be coming with that follow-up email. So we want to make sure that this gets delivered a copy to every legislator. And in that room over there, we have these with labels for legislators. So we're asking local leaders, but also any of you who have a connection or some contact with a legislator to take the one that, or many that you are willing to deliver in person. There is one little erratum sheet that needs to be put in at the right spot, and there's a folder you can put it in and put your label. Only take the ones that you promise. Word of honor will be delivered by December 16th. Okay? It has to be delivered by December 16th. If you are not sure you can do that, don't take it. We'll find other ways to get them there. The other thing is we have been talking about, we've been trying to encourage folks to have meetings with legislators, newly elected legislators, and we realize it's gotten really hard because it's hard to know where they are. They don't all have offices. They don't have phones. And many of them are kind of like, everything's really confusing. I'm not sure if I can talk to you right now. So, and we also had hoped to have some of our legislative allies host a meeting for newly elected legislators to talk about the rules. We decided yesterday, Mark Pavlovich, Tony Krokomo, and myself in an ad hoc advocacy advisor meeting, we decided that we're going to have a Zoom meeting that we will host because we are running out of time to get legislators to host that. So we're going to do that meeting on December 15th, 4 o'clock, inviting all the newly elected legislators. We're also going to invite the caucus leadership, and we're also going to invite the members of the 1PA caucus. That's a bipartisan caucus in the House. And we're also going to invite the policy chairs of each caucus. So we will be sending out an invitation early this next week, assuming we can get the emails of all those newly elected folks. We're feeling hopeful that we could do that. And we will be sending them the QR code, so they'll be able to access this online. But we realize that for many people, they've got to hear something from at least 4 or 5 directions before they hear it. So we want them to hear it from having somebody deliver this document, hard copy. We want them to get it online. We also have beautiful postcards out there on a table, lots of postcards. And we're really encouraging all of you to take postcards to send to your legislators, but also to send to the legislative leaders. And part of that follow-up email you'll be getting will have names and addresses for the leadership to say, send it to these folks. But we're inviting you to have postcard parties and get your local groups to have postcard parties. We know there's lots of retirement communities who say, give us a couple hundred, we'll get those done. We love sending postcards. Church groups perhaps would be willing to do some postcards at whatever Christmas events or holiday events or seasonal events you're having. Anyway, we don't want to take a single postcard home with us because if they're not in the mail in the next week or two, they're useless. Okay, so postcards, and then even calls to newly elected folks to say, hey, we really are concerned about rules, and keep those letters to the editor going. You're doing a phenomenal job doing letters to the editor. So we want to really keep this push going on. We want better rules. And part of what we can say is, it's right on the edge in the House. As you know, the dynamic is 102 districts went for Democrats, 101 went for Republicans. 3 of those Democratic districts are going to be empty shortly after, by mid-January. So who is going to be leading? How are they going to be leading? All of that is really teetering on the edge, but also the Senate. Although the Senate looks like Republicans are still firmly in control. If you look at the dynamics of the districts that will be up for election the next time around, it looks like it could go even the next time around. So we're hoping that the Senate leadership will notice that, and notice that there was a little bit of a shift in the House, and notice that voters are not happy when nothing gets done, and voters actually want bipartisan solutions. And you can say that survey after survey after survey shows that most Pennsylvanians want bipartisan collaboration. We want bipartisan solutions. We know there's a small minority, probably on both sides, who say never collaborate. And there was actually the Freedom Caucus had their inaugural meeting this week where they said, we don't elect people to go to Harrisburg to negotiate with liberal Democrats. Okay, there's a handful of you, but most of us want everybody to go to Harrisburg to negotiate solutions on behalf of all of us. And as we know, democracy works best when policies work for all of us, when all of us have some voice, and that's what it should be. And we need to keep insisting that's what voters want. And so we want leaders who can make that happen and see if we can push for it. We need changes in both chambers. We need changes in both chambers. And here's the message. We want bills that have demonstrated bipartisan support to come out of committee, to be given a vote in committee. It's not okay for a committee chair to say, we never give a vote on the minority party bills, or we never give a vote on gun safety bills, or we never give a vote on environmental conservation bills, or for a committee chair to say, climate change is not a thing, so we're not going to talk about it. It doesn't matter what they think. They need to give those things a conversation, and it needs to be a fair, data-driven conversation with experts from all sides, and then they need to give those bills a vote. So that's number one, is we want bipartisan solutions to get a vote. I know there's some confusion about, well, what do we mean by that? There have been resolutions introduced that say if you get X number of legislators from each side to support the bill, that's a bipartisan solution. In the House, the resolution introduced has been 20 from each side. That looks bipartisan. And in the Senate, probably something like 5 or 6 from each side. That would be a bipartisan solution. Or if you get a majority of legislators, that would be a bipartisan solution. So there's different ways to define it. The document has some suggestions about things that have worked or been suggested or have worked in other states. The other thing is there are bills that come out of committee, sometimes unanimously, that are never given a vote on the chamber floor. If a bill comes out of committee with bipartisan support, it should get a vote on the chamber floor. And as I mentioned earlier, half the bills that come out of one chamber get no action in the other. Half from one get blocked, or they might come out of committee and nothing happens. And the really enraging thing to me, as I've been digging into this, is there are commissions that are funded, that are staffed, that do amazing work, that if you read them over time, you'll see that the more recent ones give very specific legislative language like, hey folks, cut and paste. Here it is. Take this, introduce it. Those bills are introduced. Many of them get no action in committee at all. These are the committees that approve the report, put the commissions in place, and then refuse to follow their recommendations in any way at all. Unbelievable. And then some of them actually do come out of one chamber, sometimes with a unanimous vote, and then sit in committee in the other side. We need to call those out as much as we can. So take one issue, track it down, write letters to the editor. If you're part of other organizations, get those organizations writing letters to the editor and contacting legislators and say, we see this. This is not, this is not something we're not aware of. We see it. And I think they've assumed that it's too complicated. We're too discouraged. We're not paying attention. They can do what they want. This election, I think, said, no, we see you. We're watching. You can no longer do what you want. We expect you to represent us.